Okay, so today I'm going to do a quick video of, well, I don't know if it'd be quick, but a video of the stint planning worksheet that I created for our team, SimCity Racing. And I'm going to make this available to the general public because I think it's pretty useful, fairly powerful, and you can use it in a simple or complex way. It's got some pretty unique features where you can, there's like a little mini database of track information like pit loss time and car information such as time it takes to do 4 tires, the fuel flow rates, tank size, and whether or not you can do fuel and tires at the same time while you're in the pits. All of that factors into the pit lane time or pit stop time. You can also indicate, average lap times, but you can also do that per driver if you choose. And then lastly, the kind of unique feature is you can have a time of day lap time offset. So for cool attempts, you can say, I'm 4/10 quicker at this time of day. And so there's some unique features about it that I think you might find helpful. And anyway, without further ado, let me show you the spreadsheet, walk you through how to use it. I will make this available in a link in my description, and and it's in Google Sheets. So if you go to that link, you make a copy of it and you can edit it. You won't be able to edit directly the link that I give you, but if you make a copy of it in Google Sheets, you'll be able to edit it. All right, changes to desktop view. And so there's a few tabs on the bottom. There's the race parameters, the stints, which tell you, who's driving and the details about that stint. And then, when each driver starts. There's optional performance inputs. So for each driver, you can indicate, both fuel saving and non-fuel saving, average lap time and fuel consumption. And then over to the right, you've got information here around the lap time offset based on time of day. Both these features you can turn on or off, so complex or simple mode, basically. Car metrics, things like fuel flow rates, time to change tires, tank size, and whether or not you can do tires with fuel. And track metrics, the main thing here is the pit lane loss time. And you can enter in your drivers here with their time zones, so that can be factored into showing when their actual start time is. So that's just a quick overview. Let me go through the race parameters tab, and then we'll work our way across as it makes sense. So the first thing and most important thing is only enter data in red fields. If you enter data in black fields, you will break all the formulas. Do what you want, but just be warned that because I haven't protected any fields, so you can break the spreadsheet if you enter data in black fields. So the red fields is where you enter data, and that includes the first 2 drop downs here. So the first one is the track, and the second one is the car. And by selecting the track, you'll bring in information about that track. And right now, the only thing it brings in is the pit lane loss time. So if I was to change that to Watkins Glen, you'll see it went from 21 seconds to 26 seconds. And just so we're clear, the pit lane loss time is the amount of time difference between doing a lap normally and doing a lap where you come into the pits and drive to the pits at the pit lane speed limit, don't take tires or fuels, and then keep going. That's what the pit lane loss time is. You can do that manually, but I use JRT, which gives you that information. After you do a few laps, it'll tell you the pit lane loss time on the track map. So that's where I get that data from. If you select the car, then it will bring in the tank size. It'll bring in the fuel flow rates. It'll bring in the time it takes to add tires. And we'll bring in the time it takes, whether or not you can take tires and fuel at the same time. So in the case of an Audi GT3, like all GT3 cars, you can take fuel and tires at the same time. But for example, if you select a GTE car, you cannot take tires and fuel at the same time. So the difference between a fuel pit stop with pit lane and full fuel in pit lane versus full fuel and tire in pit lane, there's a difference in these 2 times when you're a GTE car, but when you're a GT3, they're the same time because you can do tires and fuel at the same time. Okay, so that's what that is. The next few sections is race duration, fuel, pit stop times, tires, and there's other calculators. I'll come back at the end to talk about the other calculators. For the most part, you won't need it, but it's there for special leagues like IVRA. I use this stuff for IVRA. Okay, going back to race duration, start with the duration. In this case, 12-hour race. I'm just modeling Sebring here. the format you enter has to be hours, minutes, seconds. In some other fields, like, when you're entering your average lap time, the format is a little different. There's a decimal point at the end here. So it's hours, minutes, seconds, and then there's a decimal, and that's where you put the tenth. So just be aware there's some different formats there, and you got to be careful you don't enter that data wrong, otherwise it will break the spreadsheet. Start time, this is in GMT, and when we're talking about individual stints, that GMT will get converted to the driver's local time, so we can see when the local driver time is when they start or finish. And the in-sim start time is useful when you're using that time of day offset feature, which I'll show you later, but basically it tells you the time of day per stint you will be in sim, and then you can look at, is it early in the morning? Can I double stint? And then also if you want to use that time of day offset feature, that's option as well. Okay, going to the fuel section. Like I said, the fuel tank size gets brought in by the car you select. So if I change that to a GTE, you can see that changes. You can specify whether or not you're using 100% of the full tank, because some leagues or races you're only using 45 or 50 or 70%, whatever it is, and it will calculate your maximum allowable. So if I change that to 50, then you can see the maximum allowable is 52 based on 104. The next one is the fuel used per pace lap. I allow you to enter a value in here to calculate the amount of fuel you use on the pace lap, so that you have a correct fuel level at the start of your race, because that does impact and can impact the number of laps you'll do on that first stint. So that's what this next one is, starting fuel after pace lap. Now under fuel, you've got no fuel saving and fuel saving approach. So the no fuel saving, going flat out, you enter in your fuel per lap and your average lap time. So the average lap time is, in this case, is 1 minute 59.7. So this is 0.7 tenths, and that's that format difference. And it will calculate your laps, your average fuel that you'll use, and then some stint time. So laps, I give you the actual laps, 28.11, just so you know if it's like 28.9, then you might want to think about fuel saving, but 28.11, then you have to do more fuel saving to get that 29 lap. I round it down because you can't do 0.1 lap and get back to the pit. So there's the rounded down number. And then the stint time is, the time on track is 55 minutes, 51 seconds, 0.6. The stint time plus fuel and the stint time plus tire and fuel is the same in this case, again, because you can change tires and fuel at the same time. But if I was to change this to GTE, you'll see that these are two different numbers now. Coming back to the fuel saving, you enter the number of additional laps you want to get while fuel saving. So if you entered in 2, you need to save 3.467 liters. You need to do or average 3.467 liters per lap. If you enter 1, it's 3.5. So it'll calculate what your target number needs to be if you want to do the extra saving. I also allow you to enter in your pace loss time. This is an average. So while you're fuel saving, you might be a tenth or 2 or 3 slower. You enter in this case, this is in this case 2 tenths slower. It gives you an average lap time, and all the calculations of the stint time are calculated as well. Over to pit stops. So again, the format here is just saying, hours, minutes, seconds, tenths. So let's go down to the bottom. Pit lane loss, again, that's determined by the track. So when you select a track, it brings that in. You don't enter any data here. I'm just explaining how this data is used. By selecting the car, it brings in the time to do 4 tires. It'll calculate the time it needed to fill the full tank based on a fuel flow time. Again, that fuel flow time is brought in by the car you select. And then the take tires with fuel is also brought in from the car metrics tab. And then the 2 numbers at the top, if you're doing GT3 cars, they will always be the same, but if you're doing a GTE car, they will be different because you can't do tires and fuel at the same time with a GTE car. Okay, in the next section under tires, I allow you to enter in your tire wear for front and rear. I only do front and rear. I don't do all 4 tires because I haven't seen much value in that. I'm just doing your worst case scenario here. So your worst, at most tracks are going to be your lefts. So you can go do some test data to calculate what your tire wear is. So in this case, I did 11 laps and I had 88% left on the front, meaning that I lost 12, and you lose 1.09 laps or wear per lap on average. On the rear, it's a little worse, so the tire wear was 1.27 per lap. And what that means is that at the end of my full stint, my rear will be a little more worn. So in this case, 64, and my front will be 69. There's a difference of 5.1. So a positive number means you got more rear wear. A negative number means you got more front wear. It's just good for predicting the balance of your car at the end of the stint. Time to change tires. Again, this is all based on the car you select. It brings in the time to change 4 tires. It calculates the time per tire, and then gives you a little table here of, if you took on 1, 2, 3, or 4 tires, how much time do I need in the pits? This is just a table for you can do some quick mental math, but honestly, you don't even need this table because in the stint plan, there is a field there that will tell you whether or not your number of tires you're adding in that stint is covered by the fuel. We'll come back to these other calculators at the end of the video because again, it's a really specific use case. All right, let's go to stints. This is where all the data comes together. So again, only enter data in red fields, please, please, please. On the left, you'll select your drivers. And all this driver data comes from the drivers tab. So if I was to add another driver here, it would show up in this tab. And then when you select a driver here, it not only indicates who's taking the stint, but if you look over to the right here, you also select the drivers that are in the race. And in this case here, you can see that these 2 stints, Martin has been selected, and therefore it tells me here automatically I'm in the car. If I was to select Corey, then it will say I'm not in the car, and that affects my drive time up here. Sorry, Chris. Change it back to Martin, and now my drive time has been recalculated. So I just want to show you the relationship between this column and these columns. And the other thing that you'll notice here is that it shows the local driver time offset. And then these times here are in the local driver's time zone. So even though it might be 12 p.m. GMT, because of the -5, it's 9:40 GMT or whatever it is. Well, the start here is 2:40 a.m. Did I enter that? Yeah, so the start time is 2:40 a.m. GMT, which is here. And then, so with a -5 offset, it's 9:40 p.m. my time. Of Corey's time, which happens to be the same as my time. Okay, so moving to the right, this is your in-sim time at the start of the stint. So this stint starts at 12 p.m. noon in game. Useful when you want to look at track conditions. The next column is whether or not you want to save fuel. So if you select this, then it'll affect the data to the right, like lap times and spin and number of laps you do and so on. So like, for example, if you look at the number of laps here, it's 27. And I click that, it turns to 28. So that's just meaning that it's, laps. I was looking at total laps. So 27 to 28. And it gets that data again from here. And the reason why, by the way, this is 28 and 29 here, but when I select this and it says, initially it says 27, and when I select this, it's 28. So it's one less lap than what's on the race parameters. It's all because of this fuel used in the first lap means I'm starting with less than a full tank. And so that just shows you how that impacts that first stint. Fuel added, it will predict how much fuel you're going to use or fuel that you add each stint. the most important one is the last one, because you might want to maybe short fill earlier in the stint. And if you do that, so let's say you look at that last stint, it's predicting the 73. So you got basically, 20, 30 liters you could play with somewhere else in the stint if you wanted to short fill to gain track position. So let's say I made this 90 here and 90 here. It makes the last stint 103, but now I'm short filling these stints, which may give me some track position. And this highlights that this field, which is overrides the calculated amount. So whenever you see this override capability, and there's a few places like the stint end time and fuel and a few other places, it allows you to override the calculated value. So I'm going to remove that, and it goes back to the calculated value. Tires, you can indicate the number of tires you want to take on a stint. So in this case, we're saying 4, but if I change it to 2, then what gets impacted is your pit time, assuming that your fuel doesn't already cover it anyway. But in this case, it does. But if I go back and change, let's say I make this a 50% fuel tank. So now I can put less fuel in. You can see that the field to the right of this says that, well, at 50% fuel, if I take tires, I'm going to be penalized every time. Because 4 tires will not be covered by the time it takes fuel. 2 tires will, 3 tires does, but not 4 tires. And so that's what this field can be useful for, to highlight for you that, the amount of tires you're taking in the case of GT3 cars where you can take fuel and tires at the same time, will or will not be covered by the fuel. I'm going to go back and change this back to 100%. Okay, and then the column to the right here is your tire wear at the end of the stint. So 4 tires, at the end of the stint, you'll be 70 in the front, 65 in the rear. This is a slightly shorter stint because it's got one less lap than the next stints, and that's why these numbers are different between the first stint and the next one. The laps here, the number per stint, and then the total number of laps for the race. And then pit time, this is calculated by adding the pit lane plus the fuel and tires. In the case of fuel and tires, if it's a car that allows for fuel and tires at the same time, it'll take the maximum of the two. In the case of GTE cars, we'll just add the two. If you want to, I'll come back to expanding these fields later to uncover more detail. And then to the right of that is the total stint time, which is the on track and the pit time. So in this case, the pit time, So in this case, this time here is the pit time plus the on track time. Start stint. So this is in GMT, and this is in GMT. I should probably indicate that. And this is also GMT. So this is, again, the GMT time, the start, and it's all calculated for you. If you decide to override this, you can. So for example, let's say this is projected to end at 4:30:45, but you come in early, or you want to come in early, you come at 4:25 a.m., then it now overrides and changes that to 4:25, and it rechanges the rest of the stint and recalculates your fuel. So it just gives you another way to, if you come in early and you want to have everything reset, you can do that. Race time remaining. This is number of hours, minutes, and seconds, and at the end you'll see it's negative. So basically, with this number at negative 28 seconds is telling you that you'll cross the finish line, and then the clock will end 28 seconds after you cross the finish line. So it just gives you an idea of when the end of the race is. And we've already covered all this driver stuff before, but basically you can indicate when you're available. That's helpful for stint planning. It calculates your driver time, and it uses the offset, which comes from here. And since I'm here, I'm just explaining this. So you're entering your offset for that person, against GMT. And then there's a little checkbox here that you can say move the clock back or forward. Right now our clocks are back, so that's why I've checked. Uncheck it, and it becomes this value. You check it, and it subtracts 1 from the value you enter. Okay, so now I want to expand some of the more powerful features. If I click on this, any of these plus signs above give you more columns. And if you see these gray fields here that say expand info or XP info, it's a little description of what you're going to see if you were to expand this. So in this case here, this is going to expand more information about lap time, and specifically driven by the optional performance inputs, where we allow you to specify lap times per driver. So in here, in the optional performance tab, you've got the non-fuel saving and fuel saving. So non-fuel saving, there's the normal average lap time, which comes from here in the race parameters tab. And if you want to override that with a different number, then you enter a number to the left here, and that overrides this number. So normally it's 159, but maybe John is slow. Sorry, John, you're not that slow, but just this example. And then you can override the fuel per lap. You can also do the same thing for the fuel saving. Maybe John is better at fuel saving, and he only needs a 1/10 extra that he adds when he fuel saves. And then you can also enter in this case, John's fuel saving rate. So the point is that when you click this on, you would then use the data specific to that. So let me just take John's stuff here and add it to me. Oops. So that since I'm in the spreadsheet, actually no, I'll do it this way. I'll go to the stint sheet and I'll show you. I'll change one of the drivers to John, and we'll bring in this 204 average lap time instead of the 159, and so on. So if I was to go here and change this to John, and I turn this feature on where click to use per driver performance, turn that on. Now you'll see that for the average lap time used for John, it's not the normal 159, it's actually John's 2-minute 4.2. The other thing, the visual indicator here that you're using one or the other is there's this little word using here under driver specific time. And that just indicates that we're using the driver specific times here as opposed to the generic times. If I was to uncheck this, then that little using moves over, oops, that little using value moves over to here. And now, in this case, John is using the generic time. That affects the average lap time, but also affects the fuel consumption. So go back to fuel consumption, back to average lap time. Sorry, optional performance driver, and turn that back on. And you'll notice the amount used here is the driver specific. Same thing, you see the word using here as opposed to under here. It's using the driver specific average fuel consumption versus the average. And like in other areas, you can override this if you want to do this just manually here. You could say, for this stint, whatever reason, John is different than what we predicted. You can enter in a number here, and you can enter in a lap time here to override this amount. So if I was to enter in 2 minutes, let's do 1 minute 58 because John is faster, then it would override that. Don't know why I did that, but I'll fix that. That shouldn't have happened. But anyway, that's just a bug in the spreadsheet, which I'll have to address. Anyway, the next thing I want to show you is the time of day. So if you notice here, this column is empty. And if I go, and this is the time of day offset. And what I'm going to do is go turn on the time of day offset feature here. And what it does is for each time of day, it predicts or tells you what your offset will be lap time wise. So between noon and between noon and up to 4 p.m., there'll be no difference in lap time. But on either side of that, you'll start to gain lap time. So at 4 p.m., your lap time will be a tenth quicker. At 6 p.m., your lap time will be 2/10 quicker, and likewise on the earlier hours in the day. You can enter in values here, whatever you want. Right now, it's calculated based on this number here, where it takes this number and starts adding or subtracting the tenth from the base number to get these numbers. But you can just manually override this if you really wanted to. Go back to stints. You can see now the time of day offset is now bringing in those offsets. And what it does is it looks at the in-sim time, and this is where the in-sim time becomes important, not the GMT actual in real life time, but the in-sim time. It says, okay, it's 4 p.m. So at 4 p.m., you're going to be a tenth quicker than you were at 3 p.m. And that's what this does. And then it takes that offset and applies that to the lap time. So in this case, the normal lap time is 1 minute 59.70. It subtracts a tenth and you get the 159.6. So this amount used column is always the value that's used in all our calculations for the average lap time and the average fuel consumption as well. Now, where does that all come into play? It comes into play under, where is it? Pits. So under if you expand this, you can see the pit lane loss time, tire time, and fuel time. And all of those things, like, actually, I'm talking out of my ass here. I misspoke. Where this stuff comes in here into play is the average lap time and fuel consumption, which basically determines how long your stint's going to be and your average fuel, and therefore how many laps you can do over here. But I will say that this stuff I just expanded over here under pit lane is affected by how much fuel you're adding. So in this last one here, for example, Corey, we're planning on adding 81 liters, and so the fuel time is 32 seconds here versus a normal full fuel is 41 seconds. If I was to overwrite this 103, for example, and change it to 90, now the fuel time here is now, instead of 41, is now 35. And so that affects the total pit stop time, which affects your total on track and pit time. So that's how all this information is used to calculate a more accurate pit time as opposed to just using averages. Anyway, so that's the point of this. Now you can just keep this collapsed, but if you really want to see how the math is adding up to get your pit time, it's there to show you. There's another column over here related to fuel, which you probably don't really ever have to expand, but it shows you the fuel you'll have at the end of the stint and at the start of the stint. Again, you don't really need to ever see that, but it's there if you want to expand it. And then this last one here is this on-track time, which again, I don't think it's that important to see, so that's why it's collapsed by default. So that's essentially how this sheet works. You can specify the number of tires, you can specify whether or not you want to save fuel, you can override things like how much fuel you're adding, and you can use driver-specific performance or time of day specific performance, which affects stint time and pit lane time. I mentioned earlier that when you're selecting the car here, it gets it from the car metrics tab. So in this tab, you can see I've entered in data for a lot of cars, but not every single car in iRacing is entered here. So if there's a car that you've selected that isn't populated in this field, you can add the field directly, or the data directly. And if I was to do that, so let's say I select a car here I know has not been added to that car metrics tab. If I select that, you'll see all these orange fields will show up. That's just a visual indication to you to say that data hasn't been provided yet. So the tank size and fuel rates and other things just are not available for this car. So if you see these orange fields, then you need to go to the car metrics and then enter data. And under the car metrics, if you expand these things at the top here, you'll see these green columns where I indicate verified or not verified. And that's just indicating to you which data I've actually verified. So for example, the Ford GT3, although I know that this is true, so I'm going to actually change that. This field here, because it's GT3, you can actually take tires with fuel. But the rest of the data for the Ford GT3, I've only verified the tire time. I haven't verified the fuel flow rate time. And the way you enter data here is for fuel, in the case of, let's say for the Ford, go onto the track, put in some fixed amount of fuel, and maybe 50 liters, and then add that while you're in the pit, and then look at the pit clock and how long it takes, and then you enter that value here. So in the case of the Ford GTE, it was 17 seconds to do 50 liters, and that calculates a flow rate, which I convert to a time value, and that gets calculated into your fuel flow rate, and then for your pit time. So I just haven't entered the data for the Ford because I was too lazy to do that for the Ford, and not a lot of people drive the Ford, and I don't drive the Ford, so that's why it's not there. It's the same thing for track metrics. So this is the one that is lacking in terms of data. So I've only done a handful of tracks here, and that's why you see this verified here. But this is the pit lane loss time. And again, I talked about this earlier, but just to reiterate, this is the time difference between doing a normal lap and doing a lap where you drive to the pits without taking fuel and tires. And again, if you use JRT, you go out and do 3 laps in JRT, it'll tell you that number above the track map. Okay, so I'm gonna go back and change another car here that is valid, and you can see all the orange fields went away. So now let me go over these other calculators. This is useful to a league like IVRA, where they have safety car periods that mimic real life, and they have different groups of cars that sometimes the race is based on race distance and not on time. So let's talk about that last point first. So recently there was a race, I think it was in Mid-Ohio, where the race was 700 kilometers and the track length was 3.621 kilometers. And so it basically tries to estimate the amount of time that the race will be. And the reason why that's important is because the way that this whole spreadsheet works is it's based on a duration race, not on a lap time, to calculate the number of stints you got to do. So to get a rough idea of how long the race is going to be, you can use this calculator here to enter in your race distance and lap time and lap distance, and it will use information such as average lap time and so on to figure out how long it will be, how many stints you're likely to have, and it makes some assumptions about what you're doing in those stints, like taking tires or not. And then below that, there's for some reason, if you were in an IVRA league and you've created this spreadsheet for the faster class, but there's also a slower class, and you want to know how many laps they're doing for the whole full race, there's this slower class thing. So if you indicate how much slower per lap that slower class is, in this case 4.2 seconds, then it will calculate the total number of laps and halfway point for that class. So in the case of the faster class, it was 97 laps was the halfway point, and 194 was the total number of laps. And for the slower class, 188 total laps and 94 laps. Debatable whether or not this is useful, because frankly, if you were in the slower class, you would have your own spreadsheet and you would just use these numbers. But anyway, it's there. The other thing that is here for leagues like IVRA is the safety car period. And the way it works is you estimate the number of laps that you will be under safety car. You estimate the safety car fuel burn, so how much are you going to burn while you're behind the safety car, and then we'll compare that to how much you would burn normally at full race speeds, and we'll say, okay, how much fuel you're actually saving. And then because you're doing 4 laps, you're saving this much fuel, you're going to save roughly this number of liters of fuel during the safety car period, and you'll do roughly this number of more laps during the race, because during that safety car period you're burning less fuel, so you're going to extend the number of laps in the race. In this case, because it's a fixed number of laps, who cares? But anyway, that's what it is. And the additional number of time that you'll be racing in that stint because you're doing more laps and you're saving fuel. This number here I didn't explain yet, but this is the additional time per lap at pace car speed above normal lap time. So whatever your normal lap time is, I think in this case 1:59, it's saying that when you're behind the safety car, it'll take another 1 minute 33 seconds to get your lap time. So you'll have to go do your own testing to see what this was likely to be, but that's how you can use this information. So this can be useful if you're trying to, anticipate how many more laps you're going to do or how much more fuel you're going to save, and calculate that into your fuel calculations. This is not incorporated in any of the fuel calculations. It does not get incorporated into the amount used, but you could then go back here and say, okay, well, I'm going to save this number of liters, so maybe I could take it away from that number there if you got a safety car in the last period or the stint before that. And then lastly, can you pit without losing a lap? So oftentimes, and this is an IVRA thing maybe, but can you pit without losing a lap, meaning that how many seconds behind the leader can I be where if I pit, I'm not going to go down a lap? And it calculates that's for you. It makes assumptions. It makes assumptions about the kind of pit stop you're doing. Like, is it full fuel? In this case, it assumes you're doing full fuel and tires. But basically, it gives you a rough idea of how much behind the leader you can be where you can still pit and not go down a lap, because you probably don't want to go down a lap. Anyway, so that's the gist of the spreadsheet. I'm going to save this video and update this link and add it in here. And so if you ever want to go back and view this, you'll have a link to this video. And then I'm going to include a link to the spreadsheet in the video that I'm going to upload. So hopefully that was useful. I might make a quicker video that just goes over the basics as opposed to this long one which goes over all the details. Anyway, hopefully you find that useful and have some fun racing.